First story. Eyes black as the night. Vietnam, 1967. It was 1967, during the thick of the Vietnam War, and I was stationed at a forward operating base deep in the jungle. The night had fallen quiet. Too quiet, even for the usual noise of the jungle. Something was off, though none of us could put our finger on it. There had been rumors circulating about a team of U.S. Marines who had gone missing in the dense forest just 3 days prior. Their mission was simple: reconnaissance, a silent sweep through enemy territory, nothing too complicated. Yet, they vanished without a trace. We knew the jungle could swallow you whole, but no one expected this kind of disappearance. The silence around their absence was unsettling. Then, on the morning of the third day, he showed up. Private Lee. But it wasn't Lee as we knew him. When he first stumbled into camp, it was clear something was wrong. His eyes, those deep brown eyes we all remembered from boot camp, were completely black. No whites, no pupils, just pitch black. It wasn't just the eyes, though. There was something about his walk, too. His movements were stiff, like a man who had forgotten how to bend at the joints. We tried talking to him, but he didn't respond. His face was expressionless, and his uniform was gone. In fact, he wasn't wearing any of his usual military gear. His skin was streaked with dirt, his body covered in strange cuts and bruises. Nothing. That made sense for the conditions he would have encountered. We all kept our distance, trying to give him space, but the air around him felt charged with an unease none of us could explain. It was like the jungle itself had crawled into him. At first we assumed he was disoriented. Maybe he'd wandered too far and had been out there for longer than anyone realized. But there was one problem. Lee's memory was gone. He couldn't remember what had happened during the mission. He couldn't even remember his own name at first. When they hooked him up to IVs, he didn't flinch. There was no sign of pain or distress, no sign he was aware of anything at all. His pulse, however, was erratic, much faster than normal, almost unnatural. That's when the doctors took notice. No one really knew what to make of it, and the higher-ups quickly got involved. It wasn't just a soldier's breakdown, it was something else. I overheard whispers from the medical staff about brain trauma or shock, but deep down, I knew we weren't dealing with something as simple as that. This was something darker, something deeper. The strangest part happened the evening after Lee arrived. I was on guard duty just before the sun set, when I saw him again. This time he wasn't alone. He was standing by the perimeter, his head turned toward the tree line, as if he was listening for something or waiting for something. I tried calling out to him, but when he turned to look at me, I felt a cold rush of fear run through me. His eyes were still black, like holes in the fabric of the universe, and they seemed to stare right through me. I don't know how to explain it, but in that moment, I felt as if there was nothing human left in him. His gaze was unblinking, almost hypnotic. And then, in the most unsettling tone I've ever heard, Lee spoke. Barely more than a whisper, but loud enough for me to hear. "They're coming for me." The hairs on my neck stood up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I asked him who was coming, but he just turned away and walked off into the darkness. No one saw him again that night. The next morning, Lee was gone again, just disappeared, like he had the first time. No one could find him. We searched for hours, calling his name, checking every corner of the camp, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. Some of the others thought it was just another episode, that he had wandered off in a delirium. But I knew better. The thing that made my blood run cold was the fact that his disappearance wasn't met with panic or urgency from him. He didn't scream for help or act out. He just vanished like it was nothing. It felt like he wasn't even part of this world anymore. Later, we were told by some of the higher-ups that Lee had been found again, a few miles from camp, standing motionless, in the same spot where he had disappeared the night before. But this time, he was different. His eyes were completely vacant, and they still had that unnatural blackness to them. I'll never forget the look on the medic's face when they brought him in that time. There was no recognition in his eyes. Nothing. The medic, a guy named Jim, told me Lee had just been standing there, staring straight ahead, unmoving like a mannequin. But the moment Jim tried to touch him, Lee's head snapped around, fast, too fast, and his eyes locked onto Jim's. Jim froze. It wasn't like a regular look. It was as if Lee was searching him, like he was probing his very soul. I've never seen anything so unnatural in my life. Jim looked like he was about to speak, but when he opened his mouth, the words wouldn't come. It was like his throat had gone dry. They sedated him again, but it didn't seem to matter. The drugs didn't work the same way on him anymore. It was like his body had become impervious to them, almost as if he was beyond human needs. After the sedation wore off, Lee just stared. For days. His physical condition started to deteriorate, and it was clear his body wasn't healing the way it should. But there was something else. The longer he stayed in the medical tent, the more strange occurrences started happening around him. I wasn't the only one who noticed it. Other soldiers did too. The atmosphere around him seemed to grow heavier, like the air itself was thickening, pressing in on us. Some of the guys started avoiding the tent altogether. They said they could feel something was off, that the air felt wrong around Lee, but nobody could explain why. The whole camp had started to shift. What was supposed to be a temporary war zone had suddenly turned into a place that felt haunted. Then came the night when things finally hit their breaking point. It was late, well past midnight, when I was on a night patrol with a few other guys. The camp was eerily quiet, and the jungle felt more oppressive than usual. The night had that kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl. As we passed the medical tent, I noticed something. The light inside was on. I hadn't seen that before at this hour, so I figured I'd check it out, make sure everything was all right. I walked over to the tent, and as I got closer, I saw Lee. But this time, he was standing in the middle of the room, perfectly still. His eyes were still those bottomless black pools, but his body, his posture, was different. It was as if he was no longer human. There was no soul behind those eyes. He was just a shell. The air in the tent was colder than it had been in days, and I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe. My heart started racing, and I had this overwhelming sense of dread that made my legs weak. I wasn't the only one who felt it. One of the other guys came up behind me and tapped my shoulder, but the moment he did, Lee's head snapped toward us. It was so sudden and so violent that it made both of us stumble back. His eyes, those empty black eyes, fixed on us, and for a moment, time just stopped. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. It was like something in those eyes was drawing me in, pulling me deeper into something I couldn't escape. That's when Lee spoke again, but this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was louder, more deliberate. "They've come for me." And then he smiled. Not the kind of smile a man would make when he's joking or trying to be friendly. It was something else, twisted, wrong. It was a grin that stretched too far, showing way too many teeth. I felt my stomach turn, and everything inside me screamed that I needed to get out of there. But before I could even react, Lee dropped to the floor with a sickening thud, like his body had just lost all ability to stand. The guys rushed in, but when they tried to touch him, he was gone. Just gone. Vanished again, like smoke in the wind. The camp went into full lockdown mode the moment Lee disappeared. Again. No one could explain it, and nobody wanted to either. The brass were getting involved now, pushing everyone to keep quiet about it. But word got out. People had seen things, weird things. They said the jungle had changed after Lee came back. There was a heaviness in the air, a presence. I didn't know what to believe anymore, but I felt it too. It wasn't just Lee who was different. There was something wrong with the entire camp now, as though a dark shadow had taken hold. The guys started to act jumpy, on edge, like we were all waiting for something. I remember one of the medics saying he saw Lee standing outside the perimeter that night, in the same spot where he had been found before. But this time there were figures standing around him, shadows that didn't belong to anyone. The worst part was the night after the medics found Lee again. We were all on edge, trying to figure out what the hell was going on, and I was assigned to another night patrol. The guys had been drinking more than usual, trying to drown out the weirdness of everything, but it didn't help. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us, something watching from the trees. It was too quiet, too still. We couldn't hear the usual jungle sounds, the insects, the birds, the rustling of animals. It felt like the world had gone mute, and then I saw it. Off in the distance, near the tree line, I could make out a figure. I thought it was Lee at first, but something about the way it moved made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't human. It was too wrong. It stood there staring at me from a distance, its body long and unnatural, like it didn't belong in this world. My chest tightened, and I could feel the sweat running down my spine. I couldn't breathe, and the more I looked at it, the less I felt like I belonged there too. I don't know how long I stood frozen, staring at that figure. It wasn't moving anymore, just standing perfectly still. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, like something was pressing on it. I couldn't even blink. But then, without any warning, the figure jerked to the side, too fast, like a puppet on a string, and I realized it wasn't alone. There were more of them, scattered among the trees, but I could never make out their shapes. They didn't look human. They didn't feel human. They were just shadows, all of them, watching us. My eyes burned from the strain of trying to focus on them, and I thought I was going to collapse from the terror. My legs finally gave out, and I dropped, to my knees, breathing heavily. That's when I heard it, a voice in my ear, low and cold, like ice in my veins. He's one of us now. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but I know I didn't stop until I was back at the camp. I told the others what I saw, but they just brushed it off. They said I was hallucinating. Maybe I was. I was so tired by then, so exhausted from the fear that had been eating away at me for days. But deep down, I knew what I saw wasn't just in my head. Lee wasn't the same anymore, and whatever had taken him, whatever had marked him with those black eyes, was still out there. It was waiting. I had a bad feeling, a terrible, gnawing feeling that none of us would ever leave that place the same, that maybe we had already been changed. The next morning, Lee was gone for good. No one knows where he went, and no one asked questions. The higher-ups swept everything under the rug. But the soldiers who were there, those of us who saw things, knew the truth. I'm not sure what happened to Lee, or why he had those eyes, or why he kept disappearing. All I know is that the jungle took him, and whatever was out there in the trees, it wanted him. I still think about it sometimes. The things we saw, the things we felt. And I still don't have an answer. The worst part is that I don't think I ever will. Second story. Fog of the Forgotten. Gallipoli, 1915. It was 1915, and I was a soldier in the Norfolk Regiment, marching with my unit through the rugged hills of Gallipoli. The air was thick with the smell of smoke from distant artillery, and the ground beneath our boots was heavy with mud and blood. The war had already taken its toll on us, but what came next was something no one could have prepared for. I remember that day so clearly, like it was etched in my mind forever. We were advancing toward what we thought were enemy positions, our mission clear. But that was before the fog. At first, it was just a light mist, rolling in over the valley, creeping like a silent predator. It didn't seem out of the ordinary. Nothing more than the usual weather conditions in the area, so we kept moving forward. But then it grew thicker, darker, more oppressive. It wasn't like any fog I'd ever seen before. It didn't feel natural. There was something wrong about it. We couldn't see a few feet in front of us, and the air turned damp and cold, even though it had been a warm day. I remember trying to call out to my comrades, but my voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the fog. The worst part was the silence. It was like the world just stopped. No sounds of the battle in the distance, no birds, no wind. The only thing we could hear was the strange, low hum that seemed to vibrate the very ground beneath our feet. Some of the men started murmuring about it. "It's just a fog," they'd say, trying to convince themselves more than anything. But deep down, we all felt it. The sense that something wasn't right. The fog had closed in on us, enveloping us entirely, until there was nothing but the oppressive weight of it pressing in from every side. We couldn't even see the rest of our platoon anymore. It was just a few of us scattered together, a handful of men stumbling through this unnatural mist. And that's when it happened. Without warning, the ground beneath our feet seemed to shudder. The fog was swirling around us as if it had a life of its own. I remember feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, like something was watching us, waiting. That's when we heard it. A noise that came from above, something like a low growl mixed with a deafening hum. At first, I thought it was artillery fire, but the sound was all wrong. It wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from the sky. The next few seconds felt like a lifetime. I looked up, trying to make sense of it all, but all I could see was the fog, churning, twisting, as if it were alive. And then we saw them. They weren't soldiers. They weren't anything I had ever seen before. I couldn't make out their shapes clearly, but I could feel them. Cold, unnatural, like they didn't belong in this world. It was as if the fog itself was taking shape, becoming something more than just mist. I remember hearing one of the men scream, his voice full of terror, but it was lost in the chaos that followed. The next thing I knew, the ground started to shake violently. The fog didn't just hover anymore. It was rising, swirling into the air, pulling us along with it. I could feel my body being lifted, like gravity itself had abandoned me. It was the most terrifying sensation I've ever felt in my life. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I looked around at the others. Some of them were panicking, others were frozen in place, and then they were gone. Just like that. 1 second they were there, and the next they were swallowed up by the fog, vanishing into thin air. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours. It felt like an eternity. My mind was racing, struggling to process what was happening, but there was no time to think. My body was still being pulled upward, weightless, as if the fog had become a force of nature itself. I could feel the cold air pressing against my skin, my chest tight, struggling to breathe, as if the atmosphere was growing thinner. The mist wrapped itself tighter around me, obscuring everything. I couldn't see the ground anymore, couldn't see my comrades, couldn't even see my own hands. It was like I had been suspended in some otherworldly space, completely disconnected from everything I knew. Then there was this intense pressure, like my whole body was being compressed. I remember trying to shout, but the words got stuck in my throat. Everything felt surreal, as if I wasn't entirely in my own body anymore. I wasn't sure whether I was still alive, or if I had already passed out and was now stuck in some kind of dream. But I could feel my heart racing, my breath shallow. I tried to keep my focus, tried to grab onto something real, but it was no use. I felt myself slipping, my mind shutting down. And then, nothing. It was like the world had collapsed, in on itself, leaving me in a void. There was no fog anymore, no mist, no eerie hum. Everything was completely silent. The pressure released from my chest and I was falling, no longer floating but falling, like I was plummeting back down to earth. When I hit the ground, I don't remember it being painful. It was more like a jarring shock, as if I had just suddenly reconnected with the world around me. I blinked, disoriented, trying to make sense of what was happening, but nothing made sense. The ground beneath me was solid again, and the fog, whatever it had been, was completely gone. The air was clear, still, like nothing had happened. The battle was gone too. There was no sound of gunfire, no explosions. It was eerily quiet. I stood up, my legs shaky, still reeling from whatever I had just experienced. I looked around, but there was nothing. No sign of the other soldiers, no bodies, not even their footprints in the dirt. It was as if the land had swallowed them whole. I felt a cold sweat run down my back, a creeping dread settling in my gut. I stumbled through the area, trying to find any sign of life, but it was useless. There was nothing. I don't know how long I walked, or if I even truly understood what had happened. It didn't feel real. The men I had marched with, my friends, my comrades, had vanished without a trace. I was alone. Completely alone in a place that had once been alive with the sounds of battle. I remember finding a spot where the ground had been disturbed, where it looked like someone had been there, but there were no bodies, no blood, just emptiness. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. But there was nothing, not a single person left. I searched for hours, maybe days, though I'm not even sure how much time had passed. It was like the world had forgotten I was even there. Eventually, I stumbled upon a group of Turkish soldiers who had been stationed nearby. I tried to explain what had happened, but they just looked at me in confusion, shaking their heads. One of them told me that they had seen the whole thing from a distance. He said they saw the fog roll in, and then the men, the entire regiment, just vanish. They disappeared in the air, he said, like smoke. I couldn't understand it then. I still can't. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was trying to comfort me, as if he thought I'd gone mad. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. There was no way I could have imagined it, no way the men could have just disappeared. They didn't just vanish into thin air. There was no trace of them, nothing. The fog, the hum, the feeling of being pulled up into something beyond our world, it all felt too real. But as much as I tried to tell myself that I wasn't crazy, I couldn't find a single explanation. The days that followed felt like a blur. I was sent back to the front lines, but I could never forget that moment. The feeling of being lifted off the ground, the men disappearing, the unnatural hum that filled the air. There were times when I thought I was losing my mind, but it was the silence that haunted me the most. No one else had experienced what I had. No one else could understand. And that was what made it so terrifying. I felt like I had crossed into a space where nothing made sense, a space where the rules of the world no longer applied. But what really ate at me was the fact that no one believed me. They didn't believe what had happened to us, what had happened to my men. They didn't believe we were gone, not really. And that's when the doubt started to creep in. Was I the only one left behind? Had I been spared? Or was I the only one left to carry the memory of something no one would ever understand? Over the years, I've tried to block out the memories. I tried to move on, to pretend like nothing had happened. But the nightmare always finds a way back. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still hear that hum. I can still feel the cold mist wrapping around me, like it's waiting to take me again. I can't explain it, but I know what I felt. The disappearance of the regiment wasn't just some war story. It was real. It was something that happened, and no one could ever truly explain it. I tried to search for answers, tried to find someone, anyone, who could help make sense of it. But every time I did, the questions only grew darker. I heard stories of other disappearances, strange phenomena around the world, stories that sounded just like ours. Some said it was a freak weather phenomenon, others claimed it was some sort of military experiment gone wrong. But the more I searched, the more I felt like I was chasing ghosts, trying to make sense of something that wasn't meant to be understood. It wasn't until decades later that I met a Turkish survivor who had been there that day, one of the men who had witnessed the fog from a distance. I don't know why I decided to track him down. Maybe it was the hope that he would have some explanation, some closure to offer. He was old by then, his face lined with years of hardship, but his eyes, they were still sharp, still haunted. He didn't speak much when I first approached him, but when I mentioned the fog, his face went pale. He looked over his shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was listening, before he spoke in a low voice, almost like he was afraid someone might hear. "I saw it too," he said. "It wasn't just the men, the fog. It took others as well. There were whispers in the army, rumors of things happening all over the front, strange disappearances, soldiers vanishing. But no one talked about it, not openly. You don't talk about things like that in a war. It's easier to pretend it never happened." He didn't offer much more than that, but it was enough. Enough to make me realize that the truth about that day, would never be fully known. We were soldiers, trained to fight, to endure, to survive. But what we faced that day was something beyond our understanding, something that didn't belong to this world. I never saw the rest of the regiment again, and I never will. I've lived with that truth for the rest of my life, haunted by the question of what really happened that day, and whether or not we were meant to be part of something bigger than ourselves. The fog wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It wasn't just a military accident. It was something other, something beyond human comprehension. And maybe, just maybe, it was waiting for us, all along, like some kind of cosmic trap. Over the years, I've tried to tell myself that I've moved on, that I've put it behind me. But the more I try to ignore it, the more it gnaws at me, like a splinter lodged deep in my mind. Every time I close my eyes, I see the fog, the way it moved like a living thing, swallowing everything in its path. The way it wrapped around us, suffocating, pulling us up into its embrace. I can still hear the hum, that low, vibrating sound that seemed to come from the very sky itself, vibrating in my bones. It doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. I've lived with that for so long now, and yet I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it. There has to be more. I've been to the spot where it happened, back to that valley in Gallipoli. I thought maybe, just maybe, I would find something, anything that would explain it. But all I found was silence, the same eerie stillness that had followed me since that day. Nothing had changed. No signs of struggle. No remnants of the men who had disappeared. It was as if the earth itself had erased them, like they had never been there at all. I can't explain it. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. But the world around me doesn't want to acknowledge it. It wasn't until a few years ago that I finally found someone who could understand. Someone who had heard of similar things happening. I was at a bar talking to an old man who had been in the army during the Second World War. We got to talking about strange events in wartime, and when I mentioned Gallipoli, his face turned ashen. I had heard rumors, he said, about soldiers from other regiments disappearing in the same way, vanishing into fog, never to be seen again. But these weren't stories that anyone talked about openly. They were hushed whispers, passed between veterans like some kind of curse. It's like they were afraid to speak of it, like the more you talked about it, the more it would drag you into whatever had happened that day. He told me that the fog wasn't just in Gallipoli. There had been similar reports from other places, other soldiers, disappearing in strange, unexplainable circumstances. But no one had ever figured it out, and the governments, they did their best to bury it, to pretend like it never happened. That conversation with the old man left me with more questions than answers. If this was something bigger, something that had happened to others, then why was it kept quiet? Why were there no records of these disappearances? Why was the entire world pretending that nothing happened? The man told me something that I'll never forget. The truth isn't always what we think it is, he said. Sometimes there are things in this world that we're just not meant to understand. That hit me harder than anything else I'd heard, because it was the one thing I hadn't considered, the possibility that we were just not meant to know. Not meant to understand what happened to us, to the regiment. Maybe the fog was something bigger than us. Maybe it wasn't just a random occurrence. What if it was a part of something that had been waiting? Something ancient, and we were just unfortunate enough to stumble into its path? That thought terrified me more than anything else, because it meant that whatever happened that day was beyond our control, beyond our comprehension. I still don't know what happened to us, or what happened to my comrades. I don't know if the others who vanished were taken somewhere far beyond this world, or if they're still out there somewhere lost in the fog. But every time I close my eyes, I can still see it. I can still feel it. And I can't help but wonder, are there others out there still searching for answers, still wondering why they were left behind, just like me? I've never told anyone about the full extent of what I felt that day. I don't think I ever will, because every time I do, it feels like I'm getting dragged back into it. Like whatever happened to us that day isn't done with us. It's still waiting, still pulling us in. I'm not sure if I'll ever truly escape it. I don't know if I want to, but I do know one thing for sure. We weren't the only ones. There are others just like us who felt it, who've been caught in that same unexplainable mist and have been lost to time. And that's the most terrifying part of it all. The fact that I don't know if what happened to us was an accident or if it was something meant to happen. Maybe it was just one of those things that the world will never explain. Something bigger than war. Something bigger than men. It's not something I can rationalize. All I know is that I felt it, felt the weight of it, the cold touch of something ancient, something beyond us. And I'll never forget the way it felt to be pulled into that mist, to disappear into the unknown. Whatever it was, I don't think it's finished with us. I think it's still waiting for the right moment to return. Just like it did that day. And maybe, just maybe, we're all still part of it. Still floating somewhere, lost in the fog. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story, The Vanishing Convoy, Afghanistan 2012. I've been sitting on this for years, unsure whether I should share it, but after coming across a similar case online, I feel like I have to. What happened to us on that day still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm just one of many who've had something like this happen to them. But the truth is, I don't know if what we saw was some kind of attack, a weird freak accident, or something else. It was 2012, a British military convoy, just like any other, but it wasn't supposed to go down like this. We were out in the middle of nowhere, somewhere deep in the Afghan desert, heading to a base for a routine mission. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the sky was starting to turn that dusty shade of purple. I remember the radios crackling in and out of clarity, and I swear I could feel the air getting heavier with every mile we moved. Around 9 p.m., just as we were driving through a particularly desolate stretch of road, our convoy came into contact with something unusual. A few of the trucks had been reporting strange lights in the sky, small, flickering lights. They weren't like the usual military flares we'd seen before. These lights were far too erratic, too quick, and they didn't have the usual red or green hues. I thought it was a glitch in the system or maybe just some weird reflection, but the tension in the convoy was immediate. People were talking over the radio, questioning what it could be, but it didn't seem like anyone had a solid explanation. Then, out of nowhere, the transmission just stopped. 1 second, we were hearing everyone's voices, asking each other what was going on, and the next, absolute silence. No static, no engine hum in the background, nothing. It was like the air had been sucked out of the valley. For a moment, we just waited. I remember staring out the window, trying to make sense of the situation, when I heard the first scream. It came from somewhere ahead in the convoy, a sharp, panicked scream that sliced through the silence. It was so jarring, so unnatural I couldn't even process it at first. Someone else must have heard it too, because the next thing I knew, someone was shouting over the radio, trying to figure out what was going on. I can't remember exactly who said it, but someone mentioned seeing figures moving around the convoy, just beyond the reach of our headlights. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary at first. There was only darkness beyond the truck's lights, but as I squinted into the night, I thought I saw movement. It was hard to tell. Shadows. Maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark. But I'll never forget how cold the air suddenly felt. And then, just like that, the lights in the sky, they were closer. They weren't flickering anymore. They were fixed, too bright and too focused on us. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos and confusion. Someone screamed again, only this time it was a different voice, one I recognized as a senior officer. That's when we all realized something was wrong. The trucks ahead of us were slowing down, but not in a controlled way, more like they were stopping for no reason. The headlights of the trucks ahead turned off one by one until the entire convoy was plunged into darkness. The radio was dead. No one was answering. I could hear my own breathing, and I swear it sounded louder than usual, like I was the only one still alive. Then came the worst part. The lights in the sky. They were moving toward us, slowly at first, then faster. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen before. The way they moved wasn't natural, wasn't like any aircraft I knew of. No one said anything for a long time, but we were all thinking the same thing. This wasn't just a malfunction. Something was happening, something we couldn't understand, and it was happening right then, right in front of us. The lights didn't just hover. They darted around, moving erratically in ways that made no sense. They would zip to one side, then vanish only to appear again, closer. It wasn't like an aircraft making a pass. It was more like they were surrounding us, almost like they were assessing us. The air felt thick, as if the very atmosphere around us was charged with energy. The engine of the truck I was in sputtered, and then went completely dead. I tried to turn the ignition back on, but it was like the battery had just been drained. The silence was overwhelming, and for the first time, I felt truly vulnerable. We were sitting ducks in the middle of nowhere, and whatever these things were, we had no way to defend ourselves. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, and the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end. At that moment, it felt like the world had stopped, and we were just waiting. I didn't know what for. Suddenly I saw it. One of the figures. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw another one, closer this time, moving out of the shadows. They weren't human. I don't know how to explain it, but they looked wrong, like something you'd see in a nightmare. Tall, unnaturally so, and their movements were jerky, stiff, like they were floating just above the ground. I remember hearing the sound of my breath catch in my throat. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I didn't even feel like I could move. They were coming closer. The whole time, those lights in the sky were just there, hovering. There was no sound from the figures, no footsteps, no rustling of clothing, nothing. But when they got close, enough I could see their faces, or what I thought were their faces. They were pale, almost translucent, with large black eyes that seemed to draw you in, like they were sucking all the light out of the world. That's when I realized no one in our convoy had said a word. The radio was dead. My teammates, they weren't moving. The stillness was suffocating. It was like time had stopped for us. I don't know how long I just sat there staring at those things, but it felt like hours, even though it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. I could feel my body trembling, my hands were clammy, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. They didn't seem to acknowledge us at first, just hovered, silent and cold, their black eyes locked on the convoy. Then one of them turned its head, slowly, unnaturally slowly, and stared directly at me. My heart nearly stopped. I couldn't breathe. It was like they knew exactly where I was, even though I was sitting perfectly still. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. But then, before I could even process what was happening, the ground beneath us seemed to vibrate. It was subtle at first, just a slight tremor like distant thunder. But then it intensified, and I realized it wasn't just the ground, it was everything. The air itself seemed to buzz with energy. I felt a pressure building in my chest, like my lungs couldn't quite expand fully. And then, in an instant, it all changed. Without warning, the lights above us grew blindingly bright, so bright that I had to shield my eyes. It felt like they were pulling everything toward them, like they had a magnetic force that drew us in. I don't know if it was fear or something else, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. I wanted to scream, to shout, but my voice was stuck in my throat. Everything around me became a blur of light and noise, like the world was being sucked into a whirlpool. And then everything went quiet. I don't know how else to describe it. 1 second, there was chaos. The next, there was nothing. No buzzing, no lights, no figures, just complete and utter silence. The pressure in my chest lifted. I looked around and realized everyone else was gone. The convoy was gone. I couldn't hear anything from the other trucks. No radio signals, no voices, just that terrifying, suffocating silence. My mind was racing, trying to comprehend what had just happened, but nothing made sense. The world around me felt distorted, like I was trapped in some weird limbo. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the empty space where my comrades had been. But when I finally got out of the truck, I found myself standing in the middle of a completely deserted road. The convoy had disappeared. No signs of struggle, no tracks, no wreckage. The vehicles were still there, but the people gone. The engines of the trucks were still running, but the interiors were completely empty, like they'd just vanished. I stumbled to the nearest truck and tried to get in contact with headquarters, but the radio was still dead. It was as if the world had just swallowed them whole. I remember walking in a daze, just pacing in the middle of the road, trying to figure out if I was hallucinating or if it was all some kind of elaborate trap. But there was no one around, no movement, nothing. It was like time had stopped. I don't know how much time passed after that. Minutes? Hours? I couldn't even keep track anymore. It felt like I had lost all sense of reality. I tried calling out, but no one responded. I walked around the trucks looking for any signs of my team, any clue as to where they went. But everything was just as still as when I first stepped out of the vehicle. I remember one thing clearly, though: the stars. They weren't right. They didn't look like they should. They were too sharp, too bright. I'm not a conspiracy theorist and I don't know anything about astrophysics, but they looked like they were in the wrong positions, as if they were shifted around, out of place. The sky had a sort of unnatural glow to it, like the light wasn't coming from the stars, but from something else entirely. I tried to focus on something concrete, anything to hold on to, but it was hard. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. I kept thinking about those damn figures, those eyes. I still couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, that I was still under their gaze. It was like they had left their mark on me, like they knew exactly who I was and where I was the entire time. And then, without warning, everything snapped back into place. The radio came to life again. The vehicle started up as if nothing had happened. The hum of the engines, the static in the air, it was like the world just returned to normal, like the last few minutes or hours had been some strange fever dream. But when I looked around, I saw something that chilled me to the core. The convoy was back. The trucks had all reappeared, but there was no sign of my team. No bodies, no footprints, no equipment left behind. It was like they had been erased from existence. I tried to get the radio to work, but all I could hear was static. The others were gone. Not just missing, they were gone, as if they had never been there to begin with. And yet, I still couldn't make sense of it. The convoy wasn't destroyed. The vehicles weren't damaged, but every trace of the men who had been with me, every single one of them, had just disappeared. There was no sign of a struggle, no wreckage, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I eventually made it back to the base, though I don't know how. My mind was a blur, and I couldn't stop shaking. I don't even remember the trip back. 1 minute I was standing in that eerie, empty road, and the next I was walking through the gates of the base. The officers there looked at me like I was a ghost. They couldn't understand what I was saying at first. They thought I was having a mental breakdown. But I knew what I had seen. I knew it wasn't just some hallucination. They never found the others. No bodies, no blood, no equipment, no trace of what happened to them. They said I must have been disoriented, that I must have wandered off or something. But that's not what happened. I know what I saw. I know those lights. I know those figures. I know they took them. It's been years since that night, and I still don't know what happened. No one ever found the rest of my team. The military swept the whole thing under the rug, called it a training accident or a miscommunication, but we both know that's not true. They're all gone, and I'm still here, stuck with this memory. The whole thing still feels like it happened to someone else, like it was a bad dream I can't wake up from. The worst part? I don't know if it's over. Every so often I get a feeling, an itch at the back of my mind, that they're still out there, watching me, waiting. Sometimes when I look up at the stars, I swear I can still see those same strange lights in the sky, flickering just on the edge of my vision. And I can't shake the feeling that something is still following me. I can't explain it. I don't think anyone can. I've tried to reach out to other soldiers who were there that night, but no one will talk about it. Some of them left the military soon after. Some of them refused to even acknowledge what happened, like they're afraid of it. I don't know if they remember what I remember, but the silence is worse than any of the nightmares. It's as if everyone involved is just pretending it never happened, or worse, maybe they've all forgotten, and I'm the only one left with this burden. The more time passes, the more I wonder if I'm going crazy, or if what happened that night was real at all. But deep down, I know the truth. I know what I saw, and every time I close my eyes, I still feel that cold, oppressive weight in the air, and I hear that scream. The one that started it all. To this day, I can't explain what happened to us, what we saw, or why it happened. But I do know one thing for sure. Whatever those things were, whatever took my team, They're still out there. Maybe they've moved on, or maybe they're still watching, waiting for the right moment. I don't know if they'll come for me again, but I live with that fear every day. It's not a fear you can escape from. It's a fear that burrows into your soul and stays there, gnawing at you, never letting you go. If you're out there reading this, and you've had something similar happen to you, don't ignore it. Don't pretend it was just a bad dream or a coincidence. I've learned the hard way that once you've seen them, you can never forget them. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.